To measure shoulder flexion, there is a presence of grading criteria where the fist of the test arm must cross C7 and the shoulder has to remain back and down. To measure the right side first, actively, while keeping their shoulders back, the client lowers their fist by flexing their elbows as far down as possible, and their fist is 3 centimeters above C7. For their passive test, the client is using an external force, which is their other hand, to push their fist further down, and the client's fist is now 5 centimeters below C7. The same is done on the left side as the right side. For the client's active test on the left side, their fist is 4 centimeters above C7. For their passive test, the client's fist is 1 centimeter above C7. This means that only the passive test on the right arm passed the grading criteria. To measure ankle dorsiflexion, there is a presence of grading criteria where the knee has to go 10 centimeters past the toes and the knee also has to remain aligned with the hip and foot. To measure the right side first, for their active test, after taking their shoes off, the client gets in a half-kneeling position and shifts their body weight to their front leg and attempts to position their front knee as far past their toe as possible. The client's knee is aligned with their hip and foot, and the distance between their front foot and their knee is 3.5 centimeters. For the passive test, the client is trying to put their front foot back as far as possible while keeping their ankle on the ground. Their distance between their toes and the wall is 5 centimeters. The same is done with the left side as the right side. However, in the active exercise, the distance between their toes and knee is 4.5 centimeters, and their passive distance is 6 centimeters. For the straight leg raise, which tests hip flexion, there is a presence of grading criteria where the lateral malleolus of the test ankle must be over the midpoint of the non-test leg thigh. The other criteria is that a neutral low back curvature is achieved. For the active test, the client lays in a supine position with their arms at their side and their palms facing up. Their legs are straight, toes are pointing up, and they try to maintain a neutral back as much as possible by using something underneath, in this case a coat. While keeping their knees extended, ankles relaxed, and toes pointing up, they are raising their leg, which is their right leg and test leg, as far as they can while their non-test leg is on the floor. The distance between the floor and the client's leg is 80 degrees. For their passive test, the starting position is the same as the active, however the professional is lifting the leg for them. They are also placing their hand underneath their back to help maintain a neutral curvature in their spine. The distance between the floor and the test leg is 90 degrees, and the grading criteria is met with the passive test because it passes the midpoint of the non-test thigh compared to where the active test does not. The same steps are taken to measure the left side compared to the right, and the active distance is 70 degrees. And the passive test was 85 degrees, meaning that only the right side passive test passed the grading criteria. For the Y-balance test, there is an absence of grading criteria because we are comparing the flexibility between the left side and right side, which isn't using any universal measurement comparisons. With the client's shoes removed, we are first testing the absolute reach distance of the left leg, where they reach anteriorly, and the distance is 66.56 centimeters, and their knee is aligned relative to their hip and foot. Then they come back to the center under control and reach posterior-laterally, with the distance being 70.4 centimeters. Their knees are also slightly varus relative to their hip and foot. When they reach posterior-medially, their absolute reach distance is 102.4 centimeters, but their knees are slightly varus relative to their hip and foot. The same thing is done with the right leg as the left leg, and when they reach anteriorly, their knee is slightly valgus relative to their hip and foot, and the absolute reach distance is 64 centimeters. Then they reach posterior-laterally, with the distance being 98.56 centimeters. When reaching posterior-medially, the distance is 70.4 centimeters, and after measuring the client's leg length from the ASIS to the medial malleolus, which was 80 centimeters, we averaged it by the three distances and divided it by 100 to find the composite score, which was 97.07 in the right leg and 99.31 in the left leg, meaning that their left leg was more flexible.
There is a difference between the client's passive and active mobility, with the client displaying higher mobility during passive tests. For active ankle dorsiflexion, the client's right ankle presented a 5 centimeter distance measured from their toe to the wall, and their left measured 4.5 centimeters. During the passive test measured from knee to foot, the client presented a 3 centimeter distance on the right and a 6 centimeter difference on the left. For both ankles, the client presented a 1.5 centimeter distance between passive and active tests. This means that the client had a limited range of motion in both active ankle dorsiflexion tests, but the left ankle performed a deeper range of motion. For active hip flexion, the client's right hip presented 80 degrees between their thigh and the floor and 70 degrees for the left. With assistance from the professional in the passive test, the right hip measures 90 degrees and the left measures 80 degrees. In both hips, both had a difference of 10 degrees more of hip flexion, meaning that the client had a limited range of motion in their active test. The right hip, however, measures more range of motion than left hip, since this angle is larger. In active shoulder flexion, the client's right fist extended 3 centimeters above C7, and the left fist extended 4 centimeters below C7. In passive shoulder flexion, the client's right fist extended 5 centimeters below C7, and the left only 1 centimeter below. Considering both active and passive tests, the difference in the right and left shoulder distance from the ear is 7 and 4 centimeters respectively. The left shoulder has a greater range of motion than the right. As a result, the left arm passed the passive test but not the active test, while the right shoulder failed both, since the right fist and the active left fist did not extend to C7. Therefore, the passive mobility of the left shoulder is not a limiting factor, whereas the passive mobility of the right shoulder will limit active mobility.
Hip mobility could have affected my client's white balance test. For the straight leg raise, when she was passively tested, my client's legs stretched to 80 degrees, meaning that her range of motion was passively limited. Her active range of motion was 70 degrees, which is actively limited. This degree value was the same for both of her legs. This affects how far she could reach with her leg in her white balance test. Since her active mobility is limited, she can't reach to the best of her ability. To answer the second question, my client's ankle and hip mobility did in fact affect her Y balance test results. When my client did the weight-bearing lunge, her passive and active range of motion is limited. She did not pass the 10 centimeters during the passive test. Her distance from the wall was 5 centimeters for her right foot and 6 centimeters for her left foot. She was passively limited. For her active test, the knee position relative to the hip and the foot is 3.5 centimeters for her right foot and left foot was 4.5. This can affect her Y balance test because her ankle dorsiflexion does not have enough mobility, which can make her unbalanced and not reach as far compared to if she had better mobility.